Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Good Deeds No Investing podcast. I am your co host, Chris 70, along with Jamie Bateman, where today we are going to open it up and just have an open discussion on the wonderful world of notes. So, Jamie, how are you today?
I'm doing well. I'm standing at my new standing desk, and it's not so much about the desk. It's more that I'm out of my walking boot, my protective boot, and I'm in sneakers, actually standing. And I drove yesterday, so recovering from my Achilles injury. The sun is shining. It's Friday. I'm doing well.
Yeah.
How about you?
Today, so I'll just say, people, if they don't like when I get excited on episodes, then you might want to turn this one off now. I'm feeling pretty fired up today, just, full disclosure. So who knows what's going to come out of my mouth this morning or this evening or whenever time it is. I don't even know what time it is during the day. So yeah, today is going to be an interesting episode as we round out the week because it is a Friday here. This is being recorded when most people are at Note Expo. So people there, hope you had a good time, got to meet a lot of note investors in the space. Wish we could be there, but unfortunately I had other commitments that I had to stay with. And Jamie, of course, is still recovering from his surgery. But Jamie, I'll let you start with kind of the, how was your week? What just happened?
Let's see. I did. I feel like we haven't had one of these in a while where you and I have just talked.
No, we've had guests a lot. So now it's, we can have kind of a back to a little open discussion where share some war stories.
But no, it's good that the two of us, at least two note investors were back home actually still working while everyone else was having fun and frolicking around. But no, I'm kidding. But let's see, this week I'm closing on a Georgia loan, a performer that I'd recently sold a couple of weeks ago. I sold some partials, so got a lump of cash and closing on this performer in Georgia, which is nice. Since I do have the license, I like to get some more Georgia loans and justify the cost of that, to be honest with you. Also had a file close out one of the New York deals that I purchased from you about almost a year ago. And we finally got the cancellation of land contract. This is, it's been vacant the whole time I've owned the land contract, and we thought had it wrapped up a while ago, but you never know with these things. And so end of the day, we finally got the land contract canceled 2 days ago. So which is a good thing. Now we can hopefully get out without losing money on that one. But so that was at least some closure. And you and I are closing on a couple deals. We closed on a couple deals for our fund.
I was gonna say, we're closing on more.
No, I forgot to tell you. No, we closed, I guess, late last week, early this week, on a couple loans that are in bankruptcy. So,
question for you. Interrupt. What about the one that had the 47 mattresses in the yard?
Yeah, so she cleaned up the blight issue, which is, the mattresses. It's ongoing. The problem was she'd be delinquent. Well, multiple problems, but one of the issues for me as far as moving forward was she'd either be delinquent or there'd be this blight issue. It was like nothing ever lined up at the same time. So we'd send a demand letter to fix the blight, to remove all these mattresses and clean up her yard, but she'd get caught up, and then so we've had to resend demand letters, start the process over for each reason. She's now delinquent, and we are moving forward with forfeiture. Yeah, so we'll see where it goes. I think that's within the next couple of weeks. It's scheduled again for another court hearing. So still unresolved, but she did clean up the mattress issue. So sorry, you can't go and stay there, Chris.
Okay. If you want to just throw out some type of situation, I can tell you kind of, pick a random thing. I'll tell you kind of that's probably occurring right now. So I could kind of just talk about it if you have anything random.
You just in the note world far as
so a situation with a note. I mean, because it probably happened to me this past week or two.
Let's see. Well, you've told me about a couple. Let's see. Have you had any recent court cases?
I was in court yesterday.
Okay. Can you talk
So
about it?
yes, I'll talk about it. I won't go into too much details, but question for you. Do you know what side the plaintiff versus the defendant should sit on?
I'm guessing that the defendant is on the left.
If you're looking,
If
if
you're-
the judge is looking at you, which
Yeah.
side should be on as a plaintiff?
I think when my wife was called into court as a witness, we were on the left side as a whole separate story.
Yeah.
Left side for defendant?
It's actually the plaintiff is closest to the jury.
Okay. Gotcha. So it depends where the jury is.
So I got to sit up at the, the big table, I guess. I joked, I, kind of like felt like OJ a little bit, sitting there just being quiet the entire time because I didn't have to testify. But it's actually it's a case that at the end of the day, there's really not like case law on it. So it's interesting that both attorneys now kind of have to write final briefs on it, and the judge will rule by the end of the month. So I was in court yesterday. Got to go visit Southern Virginia bright and early in the morning. So that was always pleasant.
I was gonna say that's one of the things that kind of surprises me in this business is like I'm surprised that there wouldn't be, if not case, well, some kind of precedent for this.
So I could talk about that one. I could talk about the case where I have a borrower that we got a judgment on, that we offered them a financial package, and they, instead of filling it out, they filed an appeals with the state Supreme Court. So I could, basically I found out about that today in regards to another court case. I've got another one where a borrower has filed an appeal, and we're waiting for the outcome on the appeal because they didn't like the initial judge's ruling, which of course was against them. I heard from the courts on a foreclosure case that we foreclosed on the property a year ago, last October. We had the sale. It sold at foreclosure a year ago.
Wow.
They have not ratified the sale yet. They did come back to the attorney with kind of 4 clarification points that they're looking for from that perspective.
So how does that work? The ratification of the sale?
So you buy a house at auction, okay, foreclosure auction, say, okay, 100 grand, bing, you're a winning bidder. The courts go through what's called the ratification, meaning, okay, they make sure the sale was published properly, everything was done properly, final accounting on everything and so forth. And usually that process would take like, a month or two, after you foreclose on a property, it takes like a month or two to get the deed from that perspective. So this one has been going on now for 13 months because of COVID, and the courts just are, extremely backed up.
That's crazy.
So I had a bankruptcy dismissal. I had a bankruptcy motion for relief that we filed, that we basically, instead of accepting the motion for relief, we basically did somewhat of a mod. The borrower's like 10 payments behind, and they've got 12 months to make up those 10 payments along with their other payments. Otherwise, if they don't, then we get the motion for relief. So I thought that was very fair to both parties, in the sense of, hey, I'll give the person another chance. If they, and if they keep up, good. If not, then we'll continue to move forward.
So it's almost like a trial payment period.
It's a quasi trial payment plan that's a part of the bankruptcy. So they actually modified the Chapter 13
that
from
is
the borrower.
Interesting.
Yep.
So question, you said you went to Virginia for court, right?
Yeah.
Is that what you said? So how do you decide when to go in person, or how does that work?
When my attorney says I need to be there. So actually I didn't need to be there because I would have had to testify. I could have went or had like the servicer or somebody, else go to testify, basically like, are you the owner of the note? Do you keep, is this like, is this the original note? Is this the payoff of the loan? Is this done in your normal business practices of maintaining these records? Questions like that, just to solidify that, yes, it's my note. But when we got there, the defendant, and again, I'll say, these are all my opinions, because I'm not a attorney, or, may not construed everything properly. The initial basically discussion, when the opening statement that my attorney gave and then theirs, they essentially agreed that the defendant was in default and that I own the debt. So in that instance, I did not have to testify. So
your potentially required presence was pretty quickly deemed not necessary, something
correct.
like that. Got
Yes.
it. But if this case were in Wisconsin, you wouldn't have been there anyway, right?
I would have flown my servicer out there and paid. If you ever look in your servicing agreements, there's language in there like if somebody has to go, you can send your servicer. Some may take or allow for like written or video, especially during COVID. But yeah, this one, because it was just 227 miles from my house. So
Gotcha. Yeah, because the one we just finally got the land contract canceled on. Originally, we had a hearing on the day after my surgery, and my attorney initially said I needed to be there, over Zoom or whatever. But I said I don't think that's a good idea. If it's so yeah. Are you seeing in general courts are pretty much opened up, and from your experience recently?
They're open, but it's very slow. They are, very slow to provide, advancing cases in certain instances. I've got a case in Maryland that is, it's unsecured loan that we're attempting to secure against the borrower's property, and the courts are not issuing summonses right now. So we filed it 10 months ago, and basically it's just kind of sitting there. So we can't, the sheriffs, it's, and that's where the sheriffs are, I'd say, challenging. For example, in Pennsylvania, I've had some cases where I think they have to notify, the sheriff has to provide service 60 days before the foreclosure sale. And they're literally going out like on November 3rd, they were going out for the ones for January 3rd. And if they don't get them that day, oops, sorry, now you're to February. And I've had that happen several occasions where it was supposed to be in November, then it got pushed to December. This one, they actually finally got contact. So I have one teed up for November 3rd from that perspective. I have a deal where we're negotiating with a borrower on basically on a settlement, and we're like the finish. The funny thing is, monetarily, we are resolved. We've agreed to a monetary amount, but they are like nitpicking one item in the agreement pertaining to credit reporting. And I've reached out to the company who I was working with and said, hey, look, basically they've requested this. Can we do this? And they said, yes, we can. And here's how we do it. So we basically essentially put an agreement. Here's what we would attempt to do, because at the end of the day, I don't, and again, I'm not an expert in any of this, but just because somebody, might say request something be done to a credit report, I honestly don't know whether or not it can or can't be done. I think if you're the reporting agency, I think you can, but again, that's...
Are they requesting action be taken for past behavior or future behavior?
Past behavior when I owned behavior from when I own, they want from when I own the loan, it not to be reported.
Got it. Yeah.
So
I figured it was either that or, hey, I'm going to make all my payments in the next year. Can you please report?
Yeah. I mean, and, I was clear that anything prior to, so first off, me as my entity, we don't report. So,
right.
Some servicers do.
Right. Yeah. For the most part, yeah.
And then the other
for
part
the most part, they don't though.
Yeah. And if it's anyone before that, I can't help you. So,
right.
And I own this loan for a very short time.
Right.
So
gotcha.
Just some of my rumblings and bubblings.
Yeah. I mean, so those are some of the kind of, in the weeds things we have going on, but you also closed out your first fund, right?
I did.
So from a kind of a business standpoint, why don't you give us an update as far as like your whole note investing portfolio versus, one deal?
So as you know, I joke with some of my marketing people, my global domination tour is, we're going to kick that off again in 2022.
Nice.
So one of the things that working on from a business perspective, working on bringing on, some more marketing efforts, including finally getting my membership group up and running that I've been talking about for a year. That is, I think, very close. Finally, I keep saying that, but I keep hitting hiccups, which are in honesty, I'm buying deals. So it's, and I'll tell people all day long, me buying assets takes part in managing my business takes that. Is more important than a membership group, because the membership group is, again, out to help people and so forth and so on. But my business comes first. So we're closing out the fund. So what that entails is all the assets are sold. So there's no longer any assets. Now I, have issued distributions back to people. So they've got all their initial equity back. I actually gave that back to them a few months ago when I had started selling off. And what I've done is I recently just issued another distribution. And then so for my October books, I'm trying to get basically those wrapped up really quickly so I can just make sure all the distributions and everything are in line with, any type of management fees that should have been taken, to see what's left. I'm still gonna have some expenses, of course, that haven't been paid, and still the final tax returns for the year and so forth. But I can hold, I don't know, call it 5-10 grand, for that, or whatever that magic number is. I'd like to try and get the rest of that money out over the next 30-60 days to investors from that perspective. Other aspects of the business, I've got other funds that are going on. Those are going well. I will say that over the past 2 weeks, and it's probably about 2 weeks later than usual, the uptick in the number of assets I've seen is incredible. I had a tape come to me today that's 1.5 million, and the seller is like, I must sell this by the end of the year. We closed the fund. We have no other funds open because, sometimes funds will sell from one fund, or allowed to sell from one fund to the other if it's, done properly. And like, we got nothing to do with these. So I'm like, licking my chops, looking at it, and some New York assets on there for you, Jamie, as well.
Okay.
But then, I've got that. I'm speaking to a seller about a $2.5 plus or minus $1 million purchase on 3 assets as well. So, between the other one, probably, I'm guessing would probably go for, because there's a lot of hair on those, say 600 grand for one. This one's, I think, 2.3. So I've got about $3 million of assets that, I'm looking at pretty strongly on. So from that perspective, so yeah, a lot from that side of things on the business. Started boarding. Go ahead.
How many funds do you have open right now then? Not counting the first one.
So we've got Integrity. Okay.
Put you on the spot.
Yep. So I got Integrity that you and I have. I've got YNR. I've got 2 Sunny Hills. So I got 4.
Got it. Okay. So before we move on,
and 2 other entities that I have notes in that I do my partials in.
Gotcha. Just before we move on from the fund closure, though, so what's your 2 biggest takeaways from managing your first fund?
It's the deal itself. So, and it's interesting because the first fund, the way I had it structured, it was 2 years. Probably wish it would have been 3. There was no preferred return. It was basically there was equity splits in the deal, so profits just got split without preferred returns. So I actually, the good and the bad with that is, the good is you can get, typically some funds up front, if you start making money early on, where on a preferred return, a lot of, without a management fee or very low management fee, you get more money up front from that perspective. So I like that. And the, backside is I just wish it would have been 3 years. Some people do get nervous though when there's no preferred return. People kind of like, but I structure it like a JV deal. The second fund honestly, I gave way too high a preferred return. It was 10% was the pref on it plus excess. And some people who've invested in that look to invest in some of my other funds. And I was having a conversation today with a guy who's I bought a lot of notes from, and he was basically saying the same thing. Everything's so consolidated nowadays. Basically what they're seeing is prefs of 5, 6, 7%. So if there's upside, no upside, maybe you can get a little bit higher. But when you get to those higher prefs, you're not making money until you have sales events, essentially, because if you're buying non-performing, you can buy enough performing to keep the money going to the investors, but it's only when you're having a sale or a foreclosure that you're tipping the scales.
So you said a couple of times you wish it were 3 years. Is that just because it takes so long to turn these deals around and sell them?
Yes. Well, you try
exit.
Yeah, you try. I look at it. Deals do take a year to year and a half. And, if it's a year and a half with some float, then you can kind of get 2 deals in. But also there's some that you buy early on that might go more than, I've had a few assets that weren't resolved because, A, COVID, but B, long foreclosure time where they may have contested it and so forth. So, the 3 years kind of gives you a little more room. And that's kind of like this tape that I'm looking at. 3 of them on there are near the finish line of foreclosure, which they will foreclose in April of May of next year. But they're like, hey, we're closing this thing. We're not going to keep it open for another 6 months and have to do tax returns and everything next year just to make a few extra more bucks off of, if we sell it, we can sell it for X. If we keep it, we could make Y, but that delta isn't worth the carry cost for the fund.
Got it.
So the other thing I'll mention, and again, I'm sorry, I'm doing all the talking today.
I'm asking questions.
There is a huge difference in owning individual assets, whether it's 1 or 20, in managing a fund. Because if you have individual assets, hey, look, you're dealing with somebody, foreclose extra costs. You can, do a cash call with that JV partner, and say, hey, I need extra $5,000. That's kind of happens sometimes. It is what it is. On a fund, you never want to have to go back to investors for money. But money that's sitting in the bank account doing nothing is not working for you. So understanding how to manage a portfolio is huge, and you cannot keep too little. You can't keep too much. So velocity and getting your capital out. And sometimes, yes, it takes longer to get your capital out the door, which, is fine because it happens, but it's when you just keep that amount there. One of the things that I recommend for people is, buy a bunch of performing loans that might be lower on the scale of, 20, 30,000 bucks, because why? Those you can get rid of easy. So if you need all of a sudden, an extra 20 grand, it's like, hey, boom, sell this note and you get your money back in 3 weeks. So.
Yeah, it makes sense. Okay. So when you start in your next fund?
I actually came up with a name for it today. So I'm all excited. So I can't say it though. I'll wait. I'll tell you offline. So you'll enjoy this one. So you're just going to put your head down. So yeah, I'm working on many different things, as I mentioned, and so forth. But let me spin the questions over to you, Jamie. You've with integrity, you've been heavily involved in a lot of the management and oversight. What have been some of your lessons learned early on in managing a fund?
That's a good question. I do. I just think right now deal flow has been challenging. I know you said things have just opened up a little bit, but in general, in the last year, it's been tough to find good deals. So I think that's, whether that's for integrity or just my business in general, I think that's an area of growth we need to work on. So I went into the fund thinking raising capital would be easier than finding assets. And I would say that's still true right now anyway. Yeah, I don't know. It's so far it hasn't been that much different from managing my own notes.
Yeah, I mean, the management of the notes is essentially the same. I mean,
Yeah.
it's more, I think investor reporting is actually easier because you just report to, a group versus people individually.
Mhm.
And, COVID's kind of slim, but you've also, you've gone through a period of time where, you weren't, basically mobile. So, you're
Yeah.
now standing, but you've also, brought on some additional help as well to
Yeah.
assist. So how is that process in managing people from that side? Because a lot of people also in this business look to, when they get to 20, 30 notes or wherever their magic number is, look to bring somebody on board. What
Yeah.
were some of the key components of why you brought specific people on board?
I mean, that's a good line of questioning. Since you needed validation on it, right? No, but
No, I'm just, no,
I think
people listening.
no,
Again, I can bust
no,
your chops
I
on many other things. So
right. um, Honestly, a lot of it for me is playing to my strengths. I've been a manager leader before. This isn't, self promotion necessarily, but I have experience in as an Army officer, as a manager at work and things like that. And, I think I enjoy managing or running a small team. So I'm not afraid of hard work, but I do like to delegate. And I think if you're going to scale, you need to, it essentially comes down to systems and people. And those systems may be heavily technology based. And so Stephen Berkey was with us for over a year. He was phenomenal. I may not listen to this, but he was a huge help. So I've brought on recently some more people to try to fill the void that he left. He wasn't working a ton of hours toward the end there, but so Sandra Andrews is now helping us, and I also have a virtual assistant who I hired about 2.5 weeks ago, and she's been great. And then I have Katie, who interviewed me on the podcast, and she helps with some of the marketing. She's less plugged into the day to day of the notes and things, but I don't know. That's for me, that's a way to scale and also make it a mutually beneficial situation where hopefully Sandra's already learning things, and certainly I can learn from her as well. But it's gone really well. It does take a lot of work to train people, and kind of just the communication piece, especially since everything is virtual. She's out on the West Coast and my VA is in the Philippines. So Katie's out on the West Coast. So, it's the new norm these days, is working virtually with people. So we'll use a variety of systems and technology to do that. But it's the last month, I'd say I've really put a lot of work into kind of trying to get the team gelling, and also the fact that you and I have been buying a lot of loans. So there's been a lot of kind of front end work on the fund loan management side for the fund, I guess. But we've got I've got rentals that are still part of our portfolio. We're closing next week on our build to rent in Ocala. Finally, it's taken 16 months plus. So notes are my primary focus for sure. But I also want to be able to scale the note business and have, do other things. So I don't know if I hit on your question exactly, but
you did. So let me, two comments from that. One is, we should have Sandra on, because Sandra, I think, has either bought or looking to buy a note. So she's trying to learn from this experience.
She has one.
Yep. And she's also has a heavy finance background, I believe.
Yeah, she does.
So full disclosure, Sandra was doing a little bit for me, but basically I couldn't keep her busy because I'm sometimes, my brain goes is very challenging how it works. And at random times, it's like I'm in the zone for something and trying to, and it's challenging because, again, I also work full time, and fitting in that time to be consistent is very challenging. I do have somebody helping me a little bit right now on cleaning up a lot of my stuff, recordings, and especially as I close out these funds, because again, you're selling assets, you're issuing assignments, if there are land contracts, deeds, and all that stuff. So I have someone helping me produce a lot of that stuff, but it's
no, I think it's a good point. It's like, honestly, you and I work pretty differently. And that's, and
Very
like
differently.
very differently, like, and obviously you've scaled, you've been doing it a little bit longer and you've scaled more than I have, but just from a personality standpoint, we're pretty different as far as you work in bursts, and it's just like, it's pretty amazing. It's pretty
Well,
amazing when you're in the zone. It's like, whoa. But
it's
then like and you have a full-time job, and I don't. So I would say I'm probably more maybe boring, consistent, whatever, but we're just different. So, and it's different circumstances. It's nice to know you can be successful with different approaches.
the funny thing you mentioned that. So my son last night says, like, Dad, you're from Massachusetts. Virginians are Virginians. Maryland's are Marylanders. It's like, what are people from Massachusetts called? And I almost just was like, I'm asshole. It was like what I like this close to saying it. I'm like, bite my tongue. And I'm thinking, well, I've only been called a masshole from Massachusetts. And I'm like, oh, New Englander. I'm like, I had to explain what a New Englander was, because also, my wife, being for former Soviet Union, like, say she's Russian. So it's also like, it's not Massachusettsan and stuff. And I mentioned that to somebody today too. And they're like, oh, I've never heard the term masshole before. And I'm like, oh, you've never been to Massachusetts then? But yeah, no, it's interesting because my style. I'll admit, I actually this morning was talking to somebody I know have known very long time, and I was basically saying, yes, one of my faults is as I continue to get older, my fuse is getting shorter and shorter, and basically I had somebody who was we were going back and forth on some contract terms for somebody to do something for me, and basically got everything resolved. And while I thought everything was resolved, and then there's like, okay, you got to go through this onboarding, and then go through the onboarding, and like the second step is like, now it's a master contract, and I'm like, I've negotiated like a contract which was like a supplemental, not the master, which this one overrides the other one and all this other stuff. And it was something that I wasn't like fully sold on it. It would definitely be a benefit, but it was something that, I was nervous to do. And it was almost like, sometimes, like when you're trying to find a reason or excuse why not to do something, this was basically it. And I was basically, and there had been a little bit of back and forth in the past of things that just didn't rub me right. But this one it was a contract that was so one-sided. It was basically like, hey, I'll do this for you, but if I screwed up, hey, I'm not liable and stuff. And there was things that were involved that could have substantial harm if they were done wrong. And I basically, so I send a message to my buddy who's an expert in this field. And I'm like, that's it. I drop in F-bombs. I'm like, I know my problem is I'm too reactive and I get too excited on things. I'm too, I'm trigger happy on things, but I'm like, just put me over the edge. And, so it's one of the things I try and work on, but it's, in reality is my personality. But by the way, do you like my haircut? And also people do say I kind of have ADD or ADHD because I do go kind of in tangents from one topic to the next as well and can't sit straight. So my hair does look good, doesn't
it? It does. Actually, no, you know what? Since you brought this up, not your hair, but you mentioned a couple of weeks ago, maybe you don't want to talk about it, but you said you put it in the Facebook group. So I figured it's somewhat public, but that you had to apologize to somebody.
Oh, yes.
Is there anything any more you want to say on that?
No, I'll just say I, again, got fired up because I thought somebody made a mistake. And for me, I'm a big proponent of, if you mess up, just admit it.
Right.
And especially for anyone that knows me, like, hey, if you mess up, just say, hey, I screwed up. But if you try and like bury it or wrap it around or try and spin it, I will either disown you or bury you, depending on how I feel that day, or attempt to. Not always successful. But I mean, that's just my mentality. Is I'm very competitive from athletic stuff, and I want to win. So I don't want to like get into like details of names or anything, but basically I thought somebody royally screwed up, which would have cost me, some dollars, basically, not $50, but not 5,000, but somewhere in between. And come to find out, basically after looking into it. And then I basically broached them on the topic and said, hey, we need to discuss this. And they're like, yep, no problem and stuff to, oh, but by the way, here's kind of like the history on this. And I was confusing loans from one to the other. And I thought, and the interesting thing is I have a borrower who has a last name, and I have a property that has a street that has the street is the same last name. So let's just say I'll use the name Smith. It's, this is common. So I have a borrower, John Smith, and then I have property at 615 Smith Ave. So I was confusing the two. And, basically they're like, hey, we didn't screw anything up. And I'm like, oops, my bad. Sorry, and I apologize, so forth. And, I don't think I had, called them out in Facebook or so forth and so on, and so forth, because I'm usually pretty careful now about calling people out from that perspective. But
do you have any borrowers? I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Do you have any borrowers that live on the street of their last name?
No.
Because I do.
Yes. And basically, and typically why that occurs is because they own all that property. Yeah. And then they subdivide it within the family and name the street after them. Because I used to be on a planning board and saw that a lot when people, and it used to be a lot of wealthy families would do that because they'd want to be like, oh, I'm naming the street after me. So
70 Lane. Yeah. I actually bought this one from your former co-host.
Oh, Miss Greenberg. I spoke to her the other day.
How's she doing? We got to get her back on the show.
Yeah, she's up to what's she telling me, 30 doors? So
really,
and
like short-term rentals or
no, a lot of long-term. She's got one short-term, but I said, wait a second, you got out of notes because you kind of wanted to, slow down, and now you go get 30 doors. I'm like,
Well, I do remember she also. And this is, there's no perfect asset class, right? And one of the downsides to notes, especially if they're performing, is they do go down in value over time if everything else is equal. And I remember her talking about she wanted to be able to pass on these things to her children. And generally speaking, rental property appreciates and notes don't. So, but yeah, that's pretty active for, it's more active than I realized.
By the way, my ADD just kicked in when you were talking about asset classes. Did you actually see that somebody created an app that will notify you of Nancy Pelosi's stock trades?
I saw you posted a video, but I didn't watch it. So I don't.
Yeah, it was basically, Russell Brand is basically now come out similar to like a Joe Rogan, and like, I don't know if you listen to the former punter or Pat McAfee, for example.
Yeah.
He's got his own little sports thing on YouTube. And what's happening now in today's world is a lot of people are going away from conventional media, which is on the news and stuff, and having their own broadcasts and stuff. And Russell Brand, who honestly, I never thought I would ever listen to, because I thought, 5 years ago, I basically thought the guy was a lunatic. Basically, kind of, he's, pretty moderate on his views, and basically he tools on both sides. So, and I'm independent, so I do this, kind of do the same type of thing. But basically he was talking about how, a lot of the people in, Congress, start out with nothing. And next thing you know, they're like, oh, they're worth, $50 million or whatever the case may be. And I know she's got family, she being Nancy Pelosi, I think her husband is involved in real estate and so forth, so on. And, not going to comment on, any of the politics side of things, but because I guess her portfolio or her family's portfolio has like triple the return of like Warren Buffett's over like the last many years. And again, this is what I've heard, is it accurate? I have no idea. But basically it came to the point where somebody's actually created an app, because people in Congress, I guess, have like 30 or 45 days that they have to report any major moves. So basically they've created an app to notify you when she makes a move, because, again, her portfolio's,
Massive.
and like gone up like 600% in the last year. I mean, some ridiculous number. I'm just throwing numbers out there, so don't take them literally, but it's like incredible. So I was kind of, laughing at when you mentioned asset class. I'm like, yeah, maybe you go after the, that asset class.
So I can tell you one asset that was in her family that did not do so well, because my brother actually still owns it. It's a rental. Bought Nancy Pelosi's nephew's house in Little Italy in Baltimore. And it was a short sale. So it didn't go well for him, I guess. But so I guess he wasn't seeking advice from her or something. I don't know.
Well, it's Baltimore as well. So
easy. No, yeah, you're right. But
I've made money on Baltimore assets. You just could be very
well.
careful.
This is in Little Italy. It's a little different, but yeah. Okay. Well, what else is going on?
Didn't I vent enough today? I was gonna say we probably should, wrap up.
Start to wrap it up.
Yeah, wrap it up. So do you have a note and bolt for this episode?
Man, I guess mine would be, and this is actually why I've been trying to hire and kind of not just to scale, but also to be able to take a step back. So I would say there are times, and some of it was forced recently because of partially because of COVID and partially because of my injury, but I've been forced to slow down a little bit. And
no pun intended.
Yeah. Just let me know when you want to play some badminton. All right. Just give me like 6 months. But anyway, my note and bold is that you need to take time to take a step back. And it's funny. My wife and I are watching The Sopranos. We're about 10 years behind or something.
Funny stories. I started watching it again because the movie came out.
Oh yeah.
So I watched the movie and then I started going back and watching the old seasons again. But yes.
Okay. So right now, and I'm not going to give anything away, but for the 3 people that haven't seen it, but Tony's taking a step back and he's like, he's trying to delegate more and do more quote unquote global thinking. So I guess I'm not saying I'm Tony Soprano by any stretch, but good, bad, or indifferent. But I think it's necessary to take time from your note business or any other endeavor to take a step back and kind of reevaluate and I don't mean this like I'm getting out of notes or something like that, but you need to create space for your mind and to be able to kind of, I felt for a while there, I was too much in the weeds on everything. And you're probably laughing at that because you do so much more. But it's important to take a step back and kind of evaluate from a big picture. Where are you headed? What are you doing? What are you doing well? What do you need to improve upon? And recently I've just been able to kind of get in that mindset more. So you need to be intentional about creating space for yourself to evaluate your business, life, whatever else. That's my note and bolt.
So I add my 2 cents briefly, because I think you touched upon a lot of good points. Because you mentioned like being in the weeds on things. I think to be successful in any business, you need to understand how it operates / functions and how much time something takes. And the best way to do that or know that is start from the bottom and work your way up. I've worked for way too many companies in my past where people at the top, never, or it's been so long that they had to go through the steps. And when they ask for something and be like, oh yeah, I can get it tomorrow. And you look at them like, tomorrow, maybe by the end of next week, best case. I mean, people think that you can just, snap a finger and something magically appears. I think that's important in this space because this space, unlike other businesses, is not as time sensitive. If you don't send a demand letter by a few days, years is when statute of limitation kicks in, but typically there's no time limits, but time is money. But it's still good to understand the process and how long things take. And the other thing I'll kind of touch upon that is, as we start towards the end of the year, time like around Thanksgiving or the last 2 weeks of the year, and I'd recommend you do it before the last 2 weeks, but start writing down, what do you want to accomplish next year? You know, take some time because things slow down in the note space because people are time off, vacations, you know, things just naturally slow down, you know, during those periods of time. So start writing down, what do you want to do next year? What do you want to accomplish? You know, and that's kind of working. It's really, what's your business plan? But putting it in that terms, you know, a lot of people are just reactive and like, okay, they just go through the steps. But if you never set your goal and work backwards from it to how to get there, kind of like getting in the weeds of, okay, I want to buy 500 notes. Okay, well, you know, how many per month or how much money do you need? You know, those are questions you need to ask yourself. Whatever.
I actually, sorry, it reminds me of a quote I saw recently from, I think, Tim Ferriss, but that being busy, that busyness, and it's probably from his 4-hour work week, which is, you know, mostly marketing, but that busyness can be a form of laziness, right? Because you're not mentally taking the time to approach things strategically. So go ahead. Sorry.
No, that would be basically, I was finishing my point. Now I got to come up with a note and bolts pretty quickly. Wow. Trying to think of
this is a first. Wow.
Now I've got a few going through my mind. Like for example, I had a loan closing. Okay. Here's one for you. Closing on a loan. Make sure the loan sale agreement, you go through that and understand the terms. For example, if you're sending money, call it today. Make sure the closing date is the day you send the money. I've seen some contracts where the closing date is after. And what that means is I may have wired the money today, but money doesn't start coming into my pocket till that closing date. So if a borrower to pay $1,000, you know, on Monday, typically the terms of agreement would be, okay, you're paying say 75 cents on a dollar, just making numbers up, you would get 75 cents on that payment. But make sure also those terms are in the agreement, because if you're buying a property, let's say you're doing due diligence 2 weeks ago, mid-October, and the UPB is 10 grand, and then basically you're going to close on it next week, just took a month, you know, borrower may have paid $1,000 payment. Now the UPB is 9,000. If you're paying 80 cents on the dollar, 10 to 8, now all of a sudden 8 to 9, you're at 88 cents on the dollar. Big difference. Typically the agreement should be structured where basically the delta in UPB should be, I'll say, deducted by the percentage you're buying it for. So if it's $1,000 payment, you're paying 75 cents, you get 750. Now, if the borrower complains, or a seller complains, be like, why are you complaining? You got $1,000 check. Like, you know, you're not losing money, you know, basically, you know, you were selling me a $10,000 UPB for 7,500. Now you're selling me a $9,000 UPB for 7,200. So basically you're making more money on the deal. So don't complain. So, but yeah, those are two things. And the last thing, just to tag along with that, and this is probably the biggest one of all for a note and bolt. Always have your attorney review a loan sale agreement with a seller for the first time. Just please, trust me, you'll want to have it done.
Yeah. So. No, those are all good. Yeah, I mean, I could tack on, but I think we've covered enough for today.
Yeah. Oh, trust us well. Plenty more event sessions. So this was fun. I feel better.
Now we should hit record.
Oh, did I not hit record?
No, you did.
Done that before too.
It would be funny.
So, well, thank you everyone for listening to this episode of the Good Deeds Note Investing podcast. I will want to just add to this that we do thank you for listening. We do have, you know, I'll say a lot of people who listen, who follow, who send us feedback, send us comments. Feel free to continue to send us feedback and comments. For those that know both of us, we are always more than happy to answer questions for individuals out there. So I want to thank you because if we didn't have listeners, we don't have sponsors paying us. So if we didn't have listeners, we'd probably actually still be recording, but.
No, but we really do. And we do appreciate the reviews if you actually can do a review. Because I've said it before, but I mean, I listen to a ton of podcasts that I don't review that I should. So I know it's easy not to, but it does help us if you can give us a hopefully positive review.
Thank you,
So,
Jamie. And thank you all for listening. And as always, go out and do some good deeds.